Picture this with me for a moment. It's 1990, and Larry is standing in Oracle's boardroom, watching his life's work absolutely crumble before his eyes. The stock, it's plummeted 80%. The company is bleeding money, employees are being laid off left and right, and the press is calling it the end of Oracle. And yet, and this blew my mind when I read this, as one observer noted, I never once saw Larry downcast. His unquenchable optimism and almost messianic self-belief never faltered. This wasn't supposed to happen to the man who built Oracle from a $2,000 investment into a database empire. But here's what separates legends from footnotes. When everything falls apart, they don't just survive, they emerge stronger. Larry later admitted, I couldn't run away. I had to save Oracle to save myself. I had no choice. Think about that for a second. He's not talking about saving a company. He's talking about saving himself. Within 2 years, just 2 years, Oracle had not only recovered, but had become the undisputed leader in database software. So how did he do this? He does it through a series of pivotal decisions that reveal the mindset of one of tech's most ruthless competitors. As Larry himself put it, it's not enough that we win. All others must lose. Today, you and I are diving into the 5 turning points that transformed an adopted kid from Chicago's South Side into what I can only describe as the samurai warrior of Silicon Valley, a man whose net worth briefly made him the richest person on earth this year. But here's the thing. These aren't just abstract business stories. They're lessons in how to think completely differently when everything is on the line. And trust me, after spending hours diving deep into Larry's story, what you're about to hear, it's going to change how you think at competing at the highest level and what it really takes to win. So let's jump in. Welcome to Inflection Moments. I'm David Franklin, and you and I are about to dive into something fascinating. You know that moment when everything changes for an entrepreneur? When one decision, one pivot, one breakthrough suddenly shifts their entire trajectory. That's what we're hunting for today. If you're building something, if you're that founder grinding it out, making those impossible decisions that keep you up at night, this episode is for you. Because today, we're going inside the mind of one of the most successful entrepreneurs in history to uncover the exact moments that transformed their journey from ordinary to extraordinary. Here's what we're doing. We're dissecting the 5 most pivotal inflection points in their career. But more importantly, we're uncovering the strategic thinking behind each decision, the kind of insight that separates the builders from the dreamers. Ready? Let's get started. I've been fascinated by Larry Ellison for years. Here's someone that's achieved enormous success, but has a pretty under-the-radar profile if you don't follow enterprise software. While most entrepreneurs play it safe once they found success, Larry consistently makes bets that seem absolutely insane to everyone around him. The Oracle founder once said, "The single most important aspect of my personality is my questioning of conventional wisdom, my doubting of experts just because they're experts, my questioning of authority." That mindset, it doesn't just build Oracle, it repeatedly saves it from extinction. What I find most compelling about Larry's story is that it's not just about brilliant strategy or perfect execution. It's about this pattern of decision-making that seems almost contradictory, embracing massive risk to reduce long-term risk, making enemies to create competitive advantages, and burning bridges to build better ones. So today, you and I are going to explore 5 pivotal moments that reveal this pattern. First, we'll examine how a college dropout's encounter with a CIA project in the 1970s led to the founding of Oracle, and why Larry chose to compete in a market that IBM had essentially abandoned. Second, we'll dive into Oracle's near-death experience in 1990, an accounting scandal that should have killed the company, but instead taught Larry the most important lesson of his career. Third, we'll explore his decision to go all in on internet architecture in the mid-90s, a move so risky that his own executives thought he'd lost his mind. Fourth, we'll look at his acquisition spree in the 2000s, particularly the brutal 18-month hostile takeover of PeopleSoft that revealed just how far Larry's willing to go to win. And finally, we're going to examine his most audacious move, a $7.5 billion acquisition of Sun Microsystems, which transformed Oracle from a software company into a full-stack tech powerhouse. Each of these moments reveals something profound about how the great entrepreneurs think and how they make decisions that seem impossible until they become inevitable. So let's dive into the first one. Let's start with a single moment that changed the entire trajectory of enterprise computing. Picture this with me. It's 1977, Larry's 32, and he's sitting in a cramped office in Redwood City in California. He's a two-time college dropout who discovered computer programming almost by accident at the University of Chicago. As he later recalls, I was largely self-taught. I just picked up a book and started programming. But here's what makes Larry different from every other programmer grinding away in Silicon Valley cubicles. He wasn't content just to write code. While his colleagues were happy solving whatever problems their bosses handed them, Larry was obsessed with finding the problems that no one else was even trying to solve. He'd grown up as an adopted kid on Chicago's South Side, and he was raised by his aunt and uncle after his teenage mother couldn't care for him. That experience of being different, of not quite fitting in, it gives him a unique perspective. He was always looking for the angles that others missed. And in 1977, sitting at that cramped desk, reading through academic papers that most programmers ignored, he found something that was going to change everything. Larry had come across a research paper by IBM scientist Edgar Codd titled A Relational Model of Data for Large Shared Databanks. Now, this isn't exactly light reading. This is the dense, theoretical computer science that no one in their right mind would ever read. But buried in all that academic language was something game-changing. Codd was describing relational databases, a completely new way to organize and access information using something called structured query language, or SQL in tech terms. Instead of the hierarchical database systems that dominated computing at the time, where you had to know exactly where the data was stored, Codd's system would let you ask questions in plain English-like commands and get answers from anywhere in the database. But here's the kicker. IBM, Codd's own employer, saw no commercial potential in his work. Think about that for a second. The company that had invented this world-changing technology was essentially ignoring it. As Larry later notes, Codd's employers saw no commercial potential in the concept of SQL, but I did. For Larry, this is like finding a treasure map that everyone else thought was just doodles. Here you have a technology that could completely transform how companies store, organize, and access their most valuable asset, their data. And the company that invented it, it wasn't even trying to commercialize it. So for someone like Larry, who'd spent his whole life looking for overlooked opportunities, this becomes impossible to ignore. But recognizing an opportunity and being able to capitalize on it, those are two completely different things. Larry had no money at the time, barely more than $2,000 to his name. He had no team, just his own programming skills. He had no customers. So who was going to buy this database software from a guy working out of a rented office? And perhaps most daunting of all, he was planning to compete against IBM, the most powerful, iconic, established company in all of computing. Keep in mind, in 1977, IBM wasn't just another tech company, it was practically synonymous with computers themselves. The saying in corporate America at the time was nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. So going up against them wasn't just ambitious, it was borderline delusional. But Larry's attitude is different from that of the incumbents. He dropped out of college twice, bounced between programming jobs, and learned that the worst thing that could happen to him has already happened. He had nothing left to lose. That's when fate intervenes in the most unexpected way possible. The CIA needed a database management system for a classified project, and the code name for this project is Oracle. Now, how exactly Larry ended up on the CIA's radar is a story in itself. Through his work at Ampex, he'd gotten connected to a company called RSI, Relational Software, that he'd co-founded with two colleagues, Bob Miner and Ed Oates. They were essentially a consulting firm taking on small programming projects to pay the bills while they figured out their next move. As Larry later revealed at an Oracle customer conference, our very first customer was the CIA. This wasn't just any contract, it was a 2-year deal worth enough money to fund exactly what Larry wanted to create, a commercial relational database system. So think about the irony of this. The CIA, America's most secretive organization, was essentially funding the development of software that would eventually make corporate data more accessible and transparent than ever before. But here's what makes the opportunity perfect for Larry. The CIA doesn't just need a database, they needed a relational database. They'd read Codd's paper too, and they understood that traditional, hierarchical databases couldn't handle the complex, interconnected intelligence data they were trying to manage. Here's where Larry makes his first pivotal decision. and it reveals everything you need to know about how he thinks about competition. He doesn't just want to build a database for the CIA. He wants to create a commercial product that could eventually compete with IBM. But he knew that releasing version 1.0 of anything would signal to potential customers that they were guinea pigs and that they were buying unproven technology. So Larry does something unusual but brilliant. He skips version 1.0 entirely. As Larry explains years later, he goes, the very first version was Oracle version 2. We knew no one would want to buy version 1. Lo and behold, the CIA was our first customer. So this wasn't just clever marketing. This was psychology at its highest level. By calling it version 2, Oracle implies that they had already worked out the kinks, that customers were getting a mature, tested product rather than participating in an experiment. But there was an even deeper strategy at work here. Larry understands that in enterprise software, the perception of stability and reliability matters more than the actual features. Companies don't want to be pioneers. They want to be smart followers who buy proven solutions. I think that's such a great phrase, it's worth repeating. Companies don't want to be pioneers. They want to be smart followers who buy proven solutions. And I think that ironically, despite most companies suggesting that they want to be market leaders in pioneering technology, nobody wants to be the first. They want to be part of that wave who are the smart followers buying proven solutions ahead of the mass market. So Oracle completed the CIA project not just on time, but a full year ahead of schedule. And Larry uses that extra year to do something that's going to become his signature move throughout his career. He turns a simple client project into the foundation for a much, much larger commercial product. But the real breakthrough, the moment that validates everything Larry believes about this opportunity, it comes in 1981. So what happened? IBM itself decides to adopt Oracle for its mainframe systems. Think about that for a moment. The company that had invented relational database technology, the company that had dismissed its commercial potential, was now licensing that technology from a startup that had started with $2,000 in a rented office. As one Oracle executive later notes, that was the moment we knew we had something special. If IBM was willing to use our database, everyone else would follow. And they did. Oracle's sales doubled every year for the next 7 years. But here's the deeper lesson that most people miss when they study Larry's early success. He doesn't just build a better database, he builds a database for a market that doesn't exist yet. This draws parallels back to the first episode we recorded on Jensen. He's building products for markets that don't exist yet, and he's backed by the conviction in what he does. While IBM focused on their traditional mainframe customers, selling to the Fortune 500 companies who'd been buying IBM products for decades, Larry was creating software for a completely different computing model. He saw that the future belonged to distributed computing, which is smaller, more flexible systems that could be deployed across entire organizations. He wasn't just competing with IBM's products, he was competing with IBM's vision of the future, and that vision was fundamentally limited by IBM's success with existing customers. That willingness to pursue what others ignored, to build for markets that didn't yet exist, to compete not just with products, but with entire industry assumptions, it becomes the defining characteristic of everything Larry would do for the rest of his career. And it all started with the CIA project, codenamed Oracle. All right, inflection point number 2. So let's talk about what might be the most important lesson in Larry's entire career. Because by 1990, Oracle was absolutely soaring. And then it crashed so hard that it almost disappeared forever. So picture Oracle in the late 1980s. The company IPOs in 1986, and it was like watching a rocket ship. Oracle's aggressive sales culture wasn't just generating explosive growth, it was creating legends. These Oracle salespeople were absolutely ruthless. They'd walk into client meeting after meeting, promise customers the moon, book massive deals, and figure out how to deliver later. As one commentator writes in his book at the time, brashness and aggression were the most prized qualities at Oracle in the 1980s, and it was working beautifully. Stock options were making employees wealthier beyond their wildest dreams. The stock price was soaring, and Larry was being held as one of Silicon Valley's visionaries. Oracle seemed absolutely unstoppable, but there was a problem lurking beneath all that success. A massive company-killing problem that's about to give Larry the most brutal education of his career. Oracle's growth strategy was simple and intoxicating. Grow faster than anyone else at any cost. The company had what they called an upfront marketing strategy. Sales teams were encouraged to book the largest possible deals immediately. So here's how it worked. If a customer signed a 3-year contract, Oracle would count all 3 years of revenue in the current quarter. So think about that for a second. They're essentially borrowing from future quarters to make the present look incredible. And thinking about this from an investor standpoint, this is what you call classic aggressive revenue recognition. But it gets worse. Salespeople were booking revenue from deals that hadn't actually closed yet. They were counting consulting services that hadn't been performed, and they were ignoring product returns. As one former Oracle exec later admits, we were so focused on making our quarterly numbers that we lost sight of whether the deals were real or not. And just kind of taking a step back here, this is one of those classic issues that I think a lot of people have with public markets companies at the time. When you're expected to report quarterly numbers, the culture that sort of builds, it can lead to serious problems down the line. And we're starting to see it here. So more than just aggressive accounting, this was a company-wide delusion. And in early 1990, reality came crashing down. Then comes the audit. And what Oracle's auditors discovered was absolutely devastating. The company's earnings had been massively overstated. And we're not talking about minor accounting irregularities here. This was systematic revenue inflation across the entire organization. In March 1990, Oracle was forced to report its first ever quarterly loss of $36 million. But that number is just the beginning. The market's reaction was swift and absolutely brutal. Oracle stock didn't just decline, it totally collapsed. The stock lost more than 80% of its value in 4 months. Employees who'd been paper millionaires suddenly found their stock options worthless. The company was hemorrhaging cash, facing bankruptcy, and had to lay off about 10% of the workforce. Larry later called it an incredible business mistake. But here's what I find fascinating. He doesn't try to blame any external factors or bad luck or market conditions. He took full responsibility. This is where you see what Larry's really made of, because his response to this crisis reveals everything you need to know about how he thinks about leadership. First, he fires a lot of the execs that he himself had promoted, including some of his closest allies. Second, he completely restructures Oracle's operations. He separates the accounting team from sales, giving it complete independent oversight. He brought in seasoned execs, which fundamentally changed how Oracle operated internally. But the most significant change was in Larry himself. The crisis had taught him the difference between growth and sustainable growth, between looking successful and actually being successful. As he later reflects, I had to save Oracle to save myself. I had no choice. So think about that phrasing. He's not thinking about saving the entire company. He's talking about saving himself. This was existential for him. But here's what most people miss when they study this whole crisis. This wasn't just about fixing accounting problems. This was about Larry learning to distinguish between short-term tactics and long-term thinking. The old Oracle had been built on clever sales tactics, aggressive accounting, and the assumption that if you grew fast enough, you could solve any problem later. The new Oracle would be built on something completely different, product superiority. Larry realizes that the sustainable competitive edge doesn't come from outselling competitors or outmaneuvering them with financial engineering. It comes from building products that are genuinely superior to anything else in the market. And that realization, it leads to one of the most important product decisions in Oracle's history. By 1992, just 2 years after this crisis, Oracle releases Oracle 7. And this product fundamentally changes everyone's perceptions about what a database can accomplish. To give you some context here, Oracle 7 includes these game-changing capabilities. That's not worth going into now because there's just too much tech jargon. But in simple terms, it makes these databases programmable and able to enforce business rules automatically. So bigger picture here, this isn't just like an incremental improvement. It's a quantum leap that established Oracle as the undisputed leader in database software. So when you fast forward a little bit to the mid-1990s, Oracle holds a 40% market share in these relational databases. But more importantly, Oracle 7 proves that the company has learned to compete on merit rather than just sales tactics. And the real result of this crisis, it's not just financial recovery, it's the emergence of a philosophy that's going to guide every major decision that Larry makes for the rest of his career. Because Larry learns that in technology, you cannot fake a sustainable competitive edge. You can have clever marketing and aggressive sales tactics and creative accounting, but eventually your products have to be genuinely better than what competitors offer. As he puts it years later, this was the first in a pattern of apparently high-risk decisions I made throughout my life at Oracle, but I only ever picked the high-risk approach when I thought that it would increase our chance of winning and our share of reward. So think about that for a moment. Larry learns to embrace massive risks in order to reduce the long-term risks, to make bets that seem dangerous in the short term, but create unassailable competitive positions over time. So here's what I find fascinating about this crisis. It teaches Larry that crisis can become your competitive edge if you handle it right. While most companies try to avoid these crises at all costs, Larry learns to use these crises as a forcing function, a way to make changes that would be impossible during normal times. So to reiterate, this crisis, it creates the disciplined, execution-focused company that's going to dominate enterprise software for the next 3 decades. And it gives him the confidence to make his next impossible bet, wagering Oracle's entire future on a technology that barely existed at the time, the internet. All right, inflection point number 3, and let's talk about the decision that almost gets Larry fired from his own company. Because by the mid-90s, Oracle had not only recovered from its near-death experience, but was absolutely crushing it with client-server computing. So picture Oracle in 95. The company's thriving, they've got the best database in the world, their client-server architecture is generating massive profits, and customers, they're happy as can be. So here's how this worked. Companies would install Oracle databases on their own servers, connected to client computers throughout their own organizations. It was profitable, it was predictable, and it was growing really steadily. Everyone in the industry was comfortable with this model. But while everyone else was getting comfortable, Larry was watching something emerge that most people dismissed as just a curiosity: the internet. Now, keep in mind, this wasn't the internet as we know it today. In 95, most businesses saw the web as a nice-to-have addition to their existing systems. Maybe they put up a corporate website, maybe they use email, but the idea that you'd run your entire business through a web browser, that seemed absolutely insane. But Larry, he sees something completely different. He saw the future of all computing. So Larry becomes convinced that this client-serving computing model was dead. Not declining, not gradually being replaced, dead. And everything, absolutely everything, would move to the internet-based applications. So again, I think we're seeing a lot of similarities between Larry and Jensen. Just like how Jensen was willing to cannibalize his existing business for this massive potential of the next generation of AI computing, Larry is doing exactly the same thing when he sees the internet coming along. As he later recalls, if Larry had his way, 11.0 would have been engineered for the internet only. So think about what this means. Instead of companies installing Oracle software on their own servers, they would access Oracle applications through web browsers with all the computing power and data storage happening in centralized data centers. This isn't just a product decision, it's a complete reimagining of how enterprise software would work. Larry's vision was that Oracle would become the operating system of the internet. I mean, think about how insane this sounds in 95. Keep in mind, we're talking about a time when most people have never even used a web browser, and Larry is saying that all of enterprise computing is just going to happen through the web. But there's just one small problem here. Virtually everyone at Oracle thinks Larry's completely lost his mind. His own sales team is completely opposed to the strategy. And these just weren't any salespeople. These were the same aggressive, hungry Oracle reps who'd built the company's reputation. And they were telling Larry that this internet thing would destroy Oracle. And this resistance, it comes to a head in a meeting that Larry would remember for the rest of his career. As he later describes it, I got a call from our president, Ray Lane, at about midday. He wanted me to come and listen to what the field had to say about giving up on client server. And when I got there, I was treated to what seemed like a carefully choreographed show. So picture the scene. You're Larry Ellison. You've built this company from nothing. You've survived a near-death experience in the 1990, and now you're in sales team. The people who generate all your revenue are essentially staging an intervention. The message was crystal clear. Their customers are not going to tolerate being forced away from client server and pushed to the internet. So this sales team presents the research showing that customers wanted to stick with client server technology. And they argue that forcing a change to internet applications would totally destroy Oracle's relationships with its most important clients. And you know what? They had data to back up this argument. Customer surveys, market research, feedback from Oracle's biggest accounts. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Customers were happy with this client-server model and saw no reason to change. So when you've got that sort of picture in the background, I think it's fair to say that this is what makes Larry a decision maker at the highest level. Despite facing unanimous opposition from his sales team, despite customer research showing a strong resistance to change, and despite the obvious risk of alienating Oracle's most profitable customers, he decides to bet Oracle's entire future on the internet. His reasoning was simple but profound, and as Larry puts it in his own words, they were mistaking the present for the future. It's the worst mistake a tech company can make. client server was dead, and all the people in the room would figure that out at the funeral. By then, it would be too late for Oracle to change course, so we had to change to internet applications now before SAP and all the rest figured it out. So think about the courage that takes. Larry's essentially telling his entire organization that everything they knew about their customers, their market, and their business model was wrong. And I think it's fair to say, like when you come up in that situation and you're willing to disagree with everyone around you, including loyal followers, it's not out of the realm of possibility that a lot of people, including your best people, would just walk straight out the door. But here's what separates Larry from other CEOs facing similar moments of resistance. He understood that you can't just dictate a fundamental change like this. As he later explains, you can't tell engineers, just do it. You have to persuade them that what's about to come next is better than what you're already doing, even when it's already successful. So Larry embarks on this years-long charm offensive. For years, not months, years, he spent his time in meetings, in conferences, and one-on-one conversations, explaining the same thing over and over again. He has to convince his engineers that the internet was going to win in this marketplace, even though Microsoft was backing client server all the way. He had to persuade his sales team that customers would eventually demand internet applications, even though customers were currently saying the opposite. As he puts it, my people have to believe in what they're doing. Larry understood that sustainable change requires genuine conviction, not just compliance. And this wasn't easy. As Larry admits years later, it took years before we killed off our last client-server product, and it wasn't fun. So think about what that must have been like. You're running $1 billion company. Your own team thinks you're making this catastrophic mistake. Your customers are resisting this change, and you have to maintain confidence and conviction for years while the transition happens. But then, in the late 90s, something happens that validates everything Larry has been saying. The dot-com boom arrives. And when that boom arrives, Oracle was perfectly positioned. So while their top competitors are scrambling to develop these internet-ready products, Oracle's already there. They'd spent years building the infrastructure, training their engineers, and developing the expertise to support internet applications. And the company's revenues absolutely exploded. Every startup, every established company, they need Oracle's internet programming tools. Every e-commerce site needs Oracle's database to handle web traffic. And every company trying to build an online presence needs Oracle's application development platform. And this is crazy to say out loud, Oracle's stock price increases more than 10 times during the dot-com boom. More importantly, Oracle has established itself as the database of the internet era. But here's what I find so fascinating about this decision. It's not just about the technology. It's about Larry learning to distinguish between what customers said they wanted and what they actually needed. It's worth repeating. It's about Larry learning to distinguish what customers said they wanted and what they actually needed. Customers in 95 didn't want internet applications because the internet applications didn't solve any problems they currently had. But Larry understood that their resistance was based on present constraints and not future needs. He realizes that the most valuable business opportunities often exist in the gap between what customers think they want today and what they'll desperately need tomorrow. And this decision, it establishes Oracle as a visionary company rather than just another database vendor. Larry has proven that he could see around corners and that he could anticipate tech shifts years before they become obvious to everyone else. But the deepest lesson from this inflection point, it's not about technology at all. It's about leadership. Larry later reflects on this. He goes, I was certain that Oracle could not succeed if it had both an offensive and defensive strategy. He'd learned that half measures do not work in technology, and you cannot hedge your bets when the industry is undergoing a massive change. And this all-in mentality, this willingness to bet everything on a vision of the future that others just couldn't see, it becomes Larry's signature approach. Looking back, I think what makes this decision so brilliant, it's not just that Larry was right about the internet, it was that he was willing to endure years of internal resistance, customer pushback, and market skepticism to position Oracle for a future that only he could see clearly. And that kind of patience, combined with absolute conviction, it's what separates visionary leaders from just operators. And it sets up Oracle perfectly for its next impossible challenge, using acquisitions as weapons of war. All right, inflection point number 4, and let's talk about the most brutal corporate battle in software history. Because by 2003, Larry wasn't just thinking about building Oracle anymore. He's thinking about eliminating the competition entirely. So picture the enterprise software landscape in 2003. Oracle has established itself as the dominant database company, but Larry had a problem. Oracle was still primarily known for databases, while the real growth in enterprise software was happening in applications, the programs that companies use to manage their finances and HR and all their customer relationships. There were three companies dominating this applications market at the time. You had SAP from Germany, which was the undisputed leader at the time. You had PeopleSoft, based in California, which had a significant chunk of the mid-market. And then there was a smaller but growing player called JD Edwards. For Oracle to truly compete with SAP to dominate this industry, Larry knew he needed to get into applications. But instead of trying to build these applications from scratch, which could take years and hundreds of millions of dollars, he decided to do what he did best, acquire his way to market leadership. So in June of 2003, days after PeopleSoft had announced its plan to acquire JD Edwards for $1.7 billion, Larry made his move. And what happened next would last 18 months and become the most vicious corporate takeover battle in Silicon Valley history. And here's what makes this battle different from every other acquisition Oracle had ever attempted. This wasn't just business for Larry, it was deeply, intensely personal. PeopleSoft CEO was a guy called Craig Conway, and Conway was a former Oracle exec who'd left the company and become one of Larry's harshest critics. And we're not just talking about polite business competition here. Conway had publicly called Oracle a sociopathic company. So think about that for a moment. Conway wasn't just competing with Oracle, he was attacking the character and integrity of the company Larry had built from nothing. For Larry, acquiring PeopleSoft would accomplish three goals: eliminate a major competitor, acquire thousands of customers for Oracle's applications, and settle a very personal score with Conway. And as we'll see, that personal element would drive Larry to go further than anyone thought possible. Oracle's initial offer was $5.1 billion, or about $16 a share. In most acquisition scenarios, that would start a negotiation, but Conway's response was immediate and unequivocal. Absolutely not. And more than that, PeopleSoft's board rejected the offer as inadequate and predatory. But Conway goes way beyond the typical takeover defense. He implemented what's called a poison pill strategy, essentially making the acquisition so expensive that Oracle would have to abandon the attempt. But then Conway does something even more unusual. He institutes what he calls a customer assurance program that promised customers between 2 to 5 times their license fees back if Oracle acquired PeopleSoft and reduced support services. So let me explain how insane this is. Conway was essentially paying customers to resist the acquisition. He was making PeopleSoft so expensive to acquire that Oracle would face potentially billions of dollars in customer payments if they won. So this isn't just an offense, it's corporate warfare designed to make the acquisition economically impossible. And this is where you start to see what Larry is really made of when everything is on the line. Instead of backing down, instead of looking for an easier target, Larry decides to prove a point about corporate America, that no defense is insurmountable if you're willing to endure more pain than your opponent. At a meeting with Wall Street analysts, Larry lays out his strategy with characteristic bluntness. We're very determined to see this thing through to the end. So he identifies three possible outcomes. First, the Justice Department could block the deal on antitrust grounds. Second, Oracle could win in Delaware court to have the poison pill removed. Or third, Oracle would run its own slate of candidates for PeopleSoft's board and take control that way. When analysts suggested that Oracle might sweeten its offer to end the stalemate, Larry makes it clear that he was prepared to wait as long as necessary. So Larry talks about this. He says it could take until June of next year when there's going to be a vote for a new board. So think about what Larry's saying here. Larry's prepared to spend over a year in a hostile takeover battle, disrupting both companies, spending hundreds of millions in legal and advisory fees, all to prove that Oracle could outlast any resistance. And what followed was 18 months of corporate warfare unlike anything Silicon Valley had ever seen. Oracle raises its offer multiple times, eventually reaching $9.4 billion. And Conway fought back with lawsuits, regulatory complaints, and a relentless media campaign. And the battle became intensely personal. Conway repeatedly attacked Larry in the press, calling Oracle's tactics predatory and destructive. Larry responds by questioning Conway's leadership and PeopleSoft's strategic direction. But here's what most people missed about this battle. Larry wasn't just trying to acquire PeopleSoft, he was using the acquisition attempt as a form of corporate warfare that would benefit Oracle regardless of the outcome. Every month that the battle continued, PeopleSoft suffered. Customers delayed purchasing decisions, employees left for more stable companies, and strategic initiatives were put on hold. Meanwhile, Oracle continued growing its database business and strengthening its market position. So you can start to see that Larry's turned this acquisition battle into a competitive weapon. Even if he lost, PeopleSoft would be very significantly weakened. But there was one variable that Larry couldn't completely control, and this was the DOJ's antitrust investigation. The DOJ was concerned that combining Oracle and PeopleSoft would create too much concentration in the enterprise applications market. This investigation lasted months and could have killed the deal entirely. Most CEOs in this situation, they're going to be looking for exit strategies, planning how to abandon the acquisition gracefully if regulators blocked it. But Larry uses regulatory uncertainty as another weapon. He knows that PeopleSoft can't make long-term plans or major investments while the acquisition is pending. The longer the investigation lasts, the more damage it does to PeopleSoft business. So you can start to see that Larry is a total animal and is as ruthless as you can imagine when it comes to leadership. Larry has essentially weaponized regulatory uncertainty, using to weaken his target while Oracle continues operating normally. And this war ends in September 2004 when a federal judge rules that Oracle's acquisition of PeopleSoft would not be anti-competitive. So with regulatory approval secured, PeopleSoft defenses, they crumble overnight. Conway was forced out as CEO, the poison pill defense becomes meaningless, the customer assurance program that was supposed to make the acquisition impossible becomes Oracle's responsibility to manage. And Oracle completes its acquisition for just north of $10 billion in December 2004. But this real victory wasn't financial, it was strategic and psychological. Because what happens next reveals how calculating Larry's strategy had been all along. Oracle immediately lays off 5,000 PeopleSoft employees. That's about a quarter of the workforce. The company shuts down duplicate facilities, cancels overlapping projects, and began integrating the most valuable customers and technologies into Oracle's platform. So this wasn't just cost cutting, it was strategic dismantling. As one industry observer notes, Oracle eliminated a competitor and acquired a valuable customer base in one move. But the most important result was what this acquisition did to Oracle's market position. Oracle could now compete directly with SAP for the largest enterprise customers, offering databases, applications, and middleware in a complete package. And this acquisition, it transforms Oracle from a database company into a full spectrum enterprise software company. And the deeper impact of this war with PeopleSoft, it's not just about market share or revenue. It's about the message it sends to every other company in the software industry. Oracle has proven that it would go to any lengths to win. Larry was willing to spend 18 months and billions of dollars in a hostile takeover battle, disrupting entire markets and outlasting any resistance. This approach, acquisitions as corporate warfare, becomes Larry's preferred growth strategy for the next decade. Over the following years, each acquisition follows the same playbook: identify strategic assets, outlast any resistance, integrate ruthlessly, and eliminate competition. This PeopleSoft battle has established that template. But on a deeper level, what this war reveals was Larry's belief about competition in the tech industry. It wasn't enough to build better products or serve customers better. A true competitive edge comes from eliminating competitors entirely. As he famously said, it's not enough that we win, all others must lose. Looking back, this war was the moment when Larry fully embraces the philosophy that would define Oracle for the next 2 decades, that competition is ultimately about power, and the ultimate power is the ability to eliminate competition itself. Okay, final inflection point now. Let's talk about the decision that most people thought would destroy Oracle. Because by 2009, Larry had built Oracle into the world's second largest software company. And then he decides to make a bet so audacious that it defies every conventional rule about how technology companies should operate. Despite there being a global financial crisis at this time, the tech industry was in the middle of a massive shift. Cloud computing was emerging. Companies like Apple were showing the power of controlling the entire tech stack, and the old model of separate hardware and software companies was starting to look obsolete. Meanwhile, a company called Sun Microsystems, which at the time was one of the pioneering companies in the industry and one that had helped create the internet with its famous "the network is the computer" vision, was in serious trouble. They were bleeding money, they're losing market share to companies like HP and Dell, and they're desperately searching for a way out. IBM had spent months negotiating to acquire Sun for $7 billion, but they'd walked away from the deal over pricing and regulatory concerns. Sun was essentially this distressed asset, a former giant that most of the industry had written off as a declining hardware company. This is when Larry sees something that everyone else misses, and what he saw would lead to the most transformative acquisition in Oracle's history. While everyone else looked at Sun and saw a struggling hardware company, Larry saw the key to Oracle's future. And his vision was so radical that it truly challenges the assumptions of how tech companies should operate. So at the time, Sun owned two of the most important technologies in enterprise computing. Java, the ubiquitous programming language that powers millions of applications worldwide, and Solaris, the operating system that runs Oracle's databases better than any other platform. But Larry's vision went beyond just acquiring these valuable assets. He wanted to create something that had never existed before, which is a tech company that controls everything from silicon chips to enterprise applications. As he explains it, Oracle will be the only company that can engineer an integrated system, applications to disk, where all the pieces fit and work together so customers don't have to do it themselves. So this sounds a bit technical, but this is quite revolutionary at the time in 2009. The entire tech industry was built on specialization. Hardware companies made servers, and software companies made applications, and customers were responsible for making everything work together. Larry was essentially proposing to recreate this old IBM model of complete tech solutions, but with modern, internet-ready architecture. It was like saying that Oracle would become the Apple of enterprise computing. There was just one problem, though. Virtually everyone thought this was the worst idea that Larry's ever had, and the opposition came from every direction. So you're starting to notice a trend here with previous inflection points. First, Oracle had never been a hardware company. Larry was essentially betting that Oracle could learn to manufacture and support physical products, servers, storage systems, network equipment, while continuing to dominate in software. So this isn't just expanding into adjacent markets, this is entering a completely different business. Second, this acquisition price was enormous. It was $7.5 billion in cash. This makes it Oracle's largest acquisition ever, and all the analysts on Wall Street were convinced that Larry was massively overpaying for a declining business. Sun's been losing money for years and was being decimated by competitors like HP and Dell in servers. And third, perhaps most dangerously, Oracle's most important partners were about to become competitors. So companies like HP, Dell, and IBM, they'd been Oracle partners for decades, supporting Oracle software on their hardware platforms. Now, Oracle would be competing directly with them. Would they continue to support Oracle software, or would they start favoring competitors like Microsoft? Industry experts were brutal in their assessments. As one analyst put it, Oracle is a software company. They don't understand hardware margins, hardware support, or hardware distribution. This acquisition will distract them from their core business and give competitors like SAP and Microsoft opportunities to gain market share. Even Oracle's own board had concerns. Board members questioned whether Larry was letting his ego drive a decision that could fundamentally damage Oracle's business model. But Larry, on the other hand, has done something that his critics hadn't, which is he'd thought through the implications of where enterprise computing was heading, and his analysis led him to a conclusion that seemed counterintuitive, but it was ultimately brilliant. The rise of cloud computing wasn't just changing how software was delivered, it was changing who had the power in technology relationships. So companies like Amazon Web Services, or AWS, are showing that the future belonged to the providers who could offer complete integrated solutions, not the individual components that customers had to assemble themselves. So Larry realizes that Oracle's traditional model, which is selling database software that ran on other people's hardware, would become increasingly vulnerable. Cloud providers could offer integrated solutions at lower cost and with better performance than what customers could achieve by assembling these components from multiple vendors. It starts to sound obvious when you think about it with hindsight, but again, this just goes to show that this decision was very unconventional at the time. But Larry's conviction is ultimately what determined the outcome here. As he explained to skeptical analysts, we're not just buying Sun's hardware business, we're buying the ability to optimize our software and hardware together in ways that no competitor can match. But the real genius here of this acquisition, it wasn't about the hardware at all. It was about gaining control of Java. As Larry notes, Java is the single most important software asset we have ever acquired. It's a bold statement coming from someone that's made big acquisitions in the past, so it's worth repeating. As Larry notes, Java was the single most important software asset we have ever acquired. Direct quote. Java was used by millions of developers worldwide and was the foundation for countless enterprise applications, including Oracle's own middleware products. So by controlling Java's evolution, Oracle could ensure that one of the most popular programming languages would continue to support Oracle's strategic goals rather than someone else's. So in January 2010, the Sun acquisition closes and then the real work begins. Larry has to prove that Oracle could actually execute on his integrated systems vision while maintaining its dominance in software. So Oracle immediately began developing what they call engineered systems, which are high-performance computing applications that combine Sun's hardware with Oracle software in ways neither could achieve separately. But this wasn't just about engineering. It was about fundamentally changing Oracle's business model. The company had to learn hardware manufacturing, distribution, and support while maintaining its software development capabilities and the customer relationships. And the risks are enormous. If these systems fail to deliver the promised performance improvements, Oracle are going to be stuck with a declining hardware business and damaged credibility in their cash cow and software. And if traditional hardware partners abandoned Oracle software, the company could lose billions in existing revenue. So what makes this strategy particularly bold is the timing. As already established, Oracle is making this bet in the middle of the worst recession since the Great Depression, when most companies are cutting costs and avoiding major strategic risks. But by 2012, just 2 years after the acquisition, Larry was able to declare victory in terms that silenced his critics. And as he told Wall Street analysts, the Sun purchase has been Oracle's most successful acquisition ever. It has been by far our most profitable acquisition, and it has already paid for itself. And the financial results back up this claim. Oracle's systems business was generating billions in revenue with industry-leading margins. And as Larry explains, our margins in our hardware business are now the highest of anyone in the server business. But the real vindication comes from the customers. Oracle systems were delivering performance improvements that traditional hardware-software combinations simply couldn't match. To give you some context of the magnitude of these improvements, customers are seeing database performance increases of 10 times or more compared to their previous systems. But more importantly, the Sun acquisition positions Oracle perfectly for this cloud computing tidal wave that's about to unfold over the next decade. So while competitors are struggling to integrate this software and hardware from different vendors, Oracle can now offer a complete optimized system that delivered superior performance for both database and application workflows. And just as important at this time, mobile computing is exploding. So this acquisition also gives Oracle control over Java's evolution, which is especially important in the world of mobile apps. Java became the foundation for Google's Android development, giving Oracle this incredible position in the smartphone ecosystem and positions them for this mobile enterprise revolution. But perhaps the most significant result of this acquisition was how it changes Oracle's competitive position in the entire tech industry. So taking a step back, this acquisition proves that Larry's vision of integrating these hardware and software systems wasn't just correct, it was totally inevitable in the industry. In an era of cloud computing and massive data processing, customers ultimately wanted technology that worked together seamlessly, not a collection of these components they had to do in-house. And drilling deeper into this acquisition validates the most important principle of Larry's entire career, that the biggest opportunities often hide behind the challenges that others find too difficult or too risky to tackle. I think it's worth repeating that the biggest opportunities often hide behind the challenges that others find too difficult or too risky to tackle. This kind of boldness in decision-making, this willingness to embrace something that creates these unbelievable competitive advantages is what separates visionary leaders from just the ordinary ones. And this completes Larry's transformation from a simple database entrepreneur into one of the most formidable strategic thinkers in business history. All right, let's take a step back for a moment. We've just walked through 5 pivotal moments in Larry's career, and I want to talk about what connects all of these decisions, because there's a pattern here that goes way deeper than just building a successful software company. The first pattern that jumps out is counterintuitive. In every major decision Larry makes, he pursues opportunities that others had written off or ignored entirely. When IBM showed no interest in commercializing relational databases, Larry built Oracle around that abandoned technology. And when that accounting crisis happened in 1990, when Oracle looked like damaged goods, he uses it as an opportunity to rebuild the company with totally different fundamentals that's going to make Oracle stronger. And similarly, when customers resist internet applications in the mid-90s, he bet Oracle's future on web-based software anyway. But here's what I find brilliant about this approach. It wasn't contrarian thinking for its own sake. It's strategic positioning. And as Larry puts it, the bigger the apparent risk, the fewer people will try to go there. We would surely lose if we had to face serious competition. So think about that logic for a second. By pursuing what others avoided, Oracle repeatedly found itself alone in massive markets. While competitors were fighting over crowded, well-understood opportunities, Larry's building dominant positions in spaces that others found too difficult or too risky to enter. And this is something where I think most entrepreneurs go wrong. We're taught to look for proven markets with clear demand, but Larry understands that proven markets also mean proven competition. Again, Larry understands that proven markets also mean proven competition, and the biggest opportunities often hide behind those that appear the most impossible. The second pattern I notice, and it's even more counterintuitive, is that Larry learns to weaponize crises. While most companies try to avoid crises at all costs, Larry turns every major challenge into a competitive advantage. For example, that accounting scandal should have destroyed Oracle, but Larry uses it to eliminate weak executives, streamline operations, and build a more disciplined organization. And think about the PeopleSoft acquisition. That battle lasted for 18 months, precisely because Larry understands that Oracle could sustain the uncertainty longer than PeopleSoft could resist it. This idea reveals something profound about how Larry approaches competition. Larry built Oracle to outlast competitors, not just outperform them. He understands that in the long run, resilience matters more than brilliance. And I think that's an idea that applies both on the individual level and the company level. Speaking directly to those founders listening, you know that resilience means more than brilliance. Of course, it helps to have both, but all else equal, resilience matters more. And going back to Larry, these crises become his tool for building organizational resilience while competitors were distracted by their own problems. And the third and the most important pattern I notice is this. In each inflection point, Larry doesn't just compete in existing markets, he totally redefines what the market could be. Oracle doesn't just sell databases, it sells the foundation for enterprise computing. And it doesn't just acquire companies, it consolidates entire industries. And it doesn't just develop software, it creates integrated platforms that don't exist before. How Larry redefines these industries requires a specific type of vision, the ability to see not just what customers want today, but what they're going to need tomorrow. When you put all these patterns together, what emerges is this unique philosophy that's built on aggression, but also waiting for the right moment. Larry would wait years for the right opportunity, but once he identifies it, he would commit completely. And thinking about this with an investor's hat on, this is precisely the philosophy that separates the good investors from the great investors. They are patiently waiting for the right opportunity, and when that comes along, they pursue it aggressively. Larry understands that in technology, being early is often more valuable than being perfect. And that edge comes from making bets that others can't or won't make. But most importantly, Larry learns to think in decades rather than quarters. Every major decision he makes was designed to position Oracle for long-term dominance, even if it creates short-term pain. And what's crazy about all these patterns you notice when studying Larry's story is how they reinforce each other. By embracing what others abandoned, Oracle faced less competition. And by using crises as an advantage, they built more resilience. And by redefining markets, they capture value that competitors didn't even know existed. That discipline to pursue difficult opportunities that create massive advantages is what transforms a $2,000 startup into one of the world's most powerful tech companies and one of the world's wealthiest individuals. Larry's journey from an adopted kid in Chicago to briefly becoming the world's richest person isn't just a story about building a great company. It's a masterclass in thinking differently about competition, about risk, and about taking your opportunities. What strikes me most about Larry's career, though, is how he consistently makes decisions that seem almost recklessly aggressive in the moment, but prove to be strategically brilliant over time. Whether it's betting Oracle's future on internet applications when customers have no interest, or spending 18 months in a hostile takeover battle that everyone thought he should abandon, Larry understands something fundamental. The biggest risk is often playing it safe. His win-at-all-cost mentality might sound ruthless, but it reflects a deeper truth about building lasting competitive advantages. In industries where technology changes rapidly and customer needs evolve constantly, incremental improvements just don't cut it. You have to make bets that fundamentally change the game. And if you don't, there are a bunch of ruthless companies right behind you that are willing to steal your lunch. But perhaps the most important lesson here from Larry's story is about persistence in the face of universal skepticism. Every major decision he made faced massive internal and external resistance. His own execs thought he was wrong about the internet. Meanwhile, industry experts thought Larry had lost his mind when he tried to acquire Sun. Yet Larry had the conviction to push forward when everyone else wanted to retreat. And that kind of conviction, in my opinion, doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from having a clear thesis about how the world is changing and a discipline to make decisions consistent with that thesis, even when the evidence isn't yet obvious to other people. Think about the incredible discipline that requires. For years, Larry endures criticism from his own team, skepticism from customers, and doubt from industry analysts. But he stays committed to his vision because he understands something that others don't. The future doesn't ask permission from the present. And what I find most remarkable is how Larry turns every apparent weakness into a strength. The near-death crisis in the early 90s becomes a foundation for building a more disciplined firm. The resistance to internet applications becomes Larry's opportunity to build this unassailable leadership in enterprise computing. Even the hostile takeover of PeopleSoft becomes a demonstration of Oracle's willingness to outlast any competitor. And I think if there's one quote that you take away from this episode that comes from Larry himself, it's this one. The most important aspect of my personality is my questioning of conventional wisdom, doubting experts just because they're experts. That mindset, combined with the courage to act on unconventional insights, is what transforms Oracle from a $2,000 startup into a company worth hundreds of billions. So the bottom line about what I hope you take away from Larry's story is this. You don't need billions of dollars or a team of thousands to apply these principles. You just need the willingness to pursue opportunities that others find too difficult, too risky, or too uncomfortable to tackle. That's the magic of Larry Ellison. Thank you for joining us on Inflection Moments. If today's story sparked a new perspective or challenged your thinking, be sure to share it with someone you know loves this stuff as much as you and I do. Maybe it's a college buddy, your water cooler buddy, or maybe even someone in the family group chat. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to our channels so you can be the first one to hear what we've got coming next. And if you're interested in insights, ideas, and lessons from some of the world's greatest entrepreneurs, sign up for our newsletter. The link is in the show notes. Until next time, keep building and talk soon.